TimberSurf here with a quick guide on what to use for a substrate to do your terraforming of your diorama or your model railway. So the first place we can have a look at is my website, Lubsdonia, and if you look in the guides section there is one marked up as terrain guide which lists the various methods that you can use. It all goes back to the good old days when I was a lad, because I'm quite old, when the only way we had was to form the height with some bits of wood and nail or staple some chicken wire, steel wire mesh, over the top to form the terrain. And that could be then covered with wallpaper paste, soaked sheets of newspaper and multiple layers built up to form a hard sheet on the top. Now, the basic technique of creating land form hasn't really changed. We need something underneath to create the support, and then it's usual to cover it in something to give the surface and texture that we're looking for. So the old-fashioned mesh technique of chicken wire is still available and is still a good method if you want really large areas to be done. It's probably the cheapest and easiest way to create the landform. But there are a number of other methods, including simple things like wood and cardboard. You can again build wooden pegs up and then fill them up with bits of cardboard and straps of cardboard over the top and give it some support. People put scrunched up paper underneath just temporarily to give it that lift so it doesn't sag when you start to cover it with things. None of these methods are wrong, and they're still valid, and if that's the way that you like to do it, then by all means it's your choice. But the more modern method is to use one of the insulation types of material as the substructure. The reason being is that it's very easy to form shapes because it's easy to work with. It's quite soft and easy to cut. The advantage also is that it is very light, which means that you don't need such a strong structure to support it, and if it's a exhibition layout, for instance, you're not having to carry a lot of weight of something heavy like plaster of Paris and heavy things. So insulation can be broken down into about 4 categories. The first 2 are PIR, or sometimes a subcategory of that is also PUR, and the other one is phenolic board. These 2 are hard, strong insulation materials that are very easy to cut, but have a slight disadvantage in that you can't cut them with a hot wire, whereas the expanded polystyrene and extruded polystyrene can both be cut with a hot wire. It just makes life a little easier to form your shapes and to cut them up rather than having to use a saw and a knife to do the same. The slight disadvantage of expanded polystyrene, the one with the white baubles on it, which these days is now coming as black, is that it's not that strong. It's quite weak. If you get a small piece you can easily snap it. So in theory, if you rest your arm on it or stand on it or something, it could give way and crack and break up. But other than that, it's just as good as the other 3. I can't say it's my favourite, but having said that, my last build I did use it because it's readily available, because you can get it for free from packaging whenever you buy things like white goods, TVs and fridges and stuff. They tend to come with it in various shapes that you can cut up and make into your landscapes. The problem with the PIR and the PUR and phenolic type boards is that they tend to come with a aluminium foil on 1 or 2 sides. If you can find it without that foil, then that's the one to go for. And if you've got no other choice than to buying one of those 2, then there is a way in which you can get rid of the foil, and it's actually to use an electric plane or a hand plane, and you just set it to about 1/4 mil thick, and you can literally shave off the surface of the aluminium and get back to nice insulation materials. The disadvantage of having the silver foil on is that you end up if you're making a sandwich, you end up with the foil in the middle, and that's quite hard to form as part of your landscape. Won't stop you working it, but can be a little bit of a pain. All of them should be glued together, and I would strongly recommend that although PVA glue will work, because PVA glue needs air to dry it, when you put it between two big flat surfaces, the air can't get to the middle and it will take forever to set. So I would strongly recommend that you use some form of adhesive that is polyurethane or Gorilla Glue or one of these hard as nails type solvent type based glues, but do test it first, because some of the solvent glues will actually melt the likes of extruded polystyrene. Just as a side note, don't be taken in if someone recommends something like Scalextric or Kingspan. They are makes, as in a manufacturer, and most manufacturers make a wide variety of the different types of insulation. So just because it has Scalextric written on it doesn't mean that you're going to get a particular type of insulation. There are several available from the same manufacturer. So you have to do a bit of investigation as to what type of insulation it is that you're buying. So as a quick recap, my preference would be for extruded polystyrene as the best of all the options, but it is somewhat difficult to get hold of, as unfortunately it's not manufactured in this country, which means you're paying a premium because they have to import it. This country being the UK, because that's where I'm speaking from. PIR and phenolic boards are much more prolific at the builders, suppliers and the big DIY stores, and are relatively cheap, but unfortunately they do have that downside of A, not being able to cut them with a hot wire, and B, they tend to come with that silver foil backing. Expanded polystyrene, the white bauble type one, is much more readily available, is quite cheap, and is probably the one you'll end up using. And as long as you're covering it with something that's quite hard and robust, there's nothing wrong with that. Once you've created the subterranean support structure for your landscape or terrain, then you need to cover it with something. There are those that actually just leave it as it is, and you can hack at the surface with a knife and then with a metal wire brush and create a rough surface that can then look quite good as a rock face, or just smooth it off with the likes of a surfoam that can give you your general contours. But most people tend to then cover it with something else, and the go-to for everybody seems to be plaster cloth bandages or Modrock or its equivalent. I'm not a fan of plaster cloth. I don't know why in particular, but it just seems a bit pointless when there are better products out there for doing the same job. It was really designed to help cover the likes of wire mesh or your newspapers, where you needed to create a band across the top surface that would hold in place while you put the next layers on it, and that is not needed for the insulation products. So there's little point in using it. You might as well just cover it with a surface of plaster of Paris. The better product these days is sculptor mould or its equivalent, and I'm going to discuss that a bit further in a future vid bit about what to use and some alternatives for making your own a lot cheaper. So until then, it's ciao for now from me, TimberSurf, and I'll catch you in the next one.